Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to The Back Row from What I Watched Tonight. My name is Matt Hudson and this is Retrospectives. It is a show to discuss a favourite movie with someone who shares that same opinion. So joining me in The Back Row tonight is Nebraska's finest representative alongside soybeans and Nebraska Brewing Company, and he's the only man I think of when the initials JC are uttered. It's Jared Charles from the Burrow Reviews. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. How are you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm very, very well. Thank you for asking. For those who aren't aware, myself and Jared, we used to do a monthly or semi-regular show about comic books. It's called Comic Casts, and we went back and spoke about some of the classic comic book films. So I'm not new to Jared, and Jared, sadly for him, it isn't new to me. But it's good to get back on a saddle with you.
Yeah, totally. I kind of miss that show occasionally. I think about it every once in a while, and I'm like, man, and with everything on pause right now, I've been kind of going back through superhero discography, and I've been doing horror discography, and I'm kind of just using this time here that I have to just kind of go back and look at some of those older films and kind of just reevaluate them, because my opinions have definitely changed on quite a few of them.
No, absolutely. I've been doing the same here with the lack of anything coming out on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney Plus, and obviously the theatres being closed. I've just been using the time to look back at old classics and some of the films that we spoke about, especially the X-Men films, the early ones, and The Dark Knight, but also I mentioned some horror films, and that forms the basis of tonight's show. It's kind of a horror film. It's also a sci-fi film. Whatever you think about it, it's a classic. Jared and myself tonight, we're talking about Alien from 1979. So before we get into discussion, I will jump into the usual admin. So who's it directed by? A man called Ridley Scott. You may have heard of him. And it stars Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, Tom Skerritt as Dallas, Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett, rest in peace, John Hurt as Kane, rest in peace, Ian Holm as Ash, and Yaphet Kotto as Parker. It had a limited US release on May the 25th, 1979, and received a wide release on June the 2nd. However, for people in the UK, we had to wait until 1980 for a wide release. It was made for around $11 million, depending on who you believe, but it's raked in $203.6 million worldwide. And what's it about? Well, it follows a crew of the commercial space tug Nostromo, who intercept a distress call from a nearby moon, and after being sent to investigate, a deadly and aggressive extraterrestrial is set loose on the ship, which is always a bummer. So before we speak about the film, this is your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen 1979's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, go and watch it. It's depending on what version you see. It's about an hour and 50, 2 hours minutes long. 2 hours minutes, 2 hours long. Go check it out. Come back, listen to Jared and myself speaking about it, because we are going to dive into the film and full spoilers. So one last time, spoilers. So Jared, Alien. Why on earth does this film rank so highly on your best of lists?
Oh man, it's one of those few movies that I go back to probably a few times a year. I don't usually do that for most films, but with this one in particular, I think it's where my love of science fiction came from. I'm just fascinated by this universe, and Blade Runner 2 for that matter. So it's just one of those films that struck me in a very, very poignant way, where I do occasionally go back and watch it, and every time I watch it, I'm completely invested too. I'm not usually on my phone. I'm not usually doing anything else but watching the film, and so that's one of the reasons why I think I love it so much. Any science fiction movie that comes out today has taken a lot from Alien, and certain tropes, certain things that are in that movie have paved way for more science fiction, and I cannot complain with that.
No, well said, my friend. And most people see horror films for some reason when they're far too young to watch them. Mm-hmm. And I believe in the States this would be an X maybe, or an R rating, or whatever the highest you have over there at the time. How old were you when you first saw this?
So I was in middle school. I believe I was in 6th grade when I was watching this. And actually, I had watched horror films prior to this. Scream I watched way early on, definitely before I got to middle school even. So I was already familiar with the horror genre. But this one, it was a little bit different. Like you said earlier, it kind of takes the concept of like a horror movie, and because of the setting in space, it kind of blends genres a little bit, and that bending right there is what influenced my, filmic taste, growing up after that. So it's a little bit different. But at that time, I wasn't necessarily scared by this movie as much as I was fascinated by it. And, no matter who I talk to, it seems to be across the board. That's what the feeling is.
Are you scared by it now?
The idea of being alone in space with this xenomorph who's kind of just going in and out of air ducts, and I'm not sure, quite what's going on, a little bit disoriented. It seems kind of frightening now, yes.
Yeah, if Elon Musk is sending us to space, I ain't going if this is what space is like. I don't also have a few $1 million to spare, but I really fancy going into space. But what are some of your favourite moments off the bat then from Alien?
Oh, okay. So one thing that really strikes me about this film, and real quick, I'm going to take a sip out of my Alien pint glass that I got from Alamo Draft House, so that's a plug there.
Yes.
But I just got done with the sinus infection. Give me just a second here.
He's even the cup is on point.
Yes, the cup is on point. That was an important part of the show, and I wanted to make sure it was in it. But what we got for some of my favorite moments, I think there's not like one scene in particular that really strikes me, but what I will say is the camera work here and the positioning of the camera is probably my favorite aspect of the whole entire film. Specifically, the POV shots that we get from, numerous characters and even a cat throughout the show. I think that is so effective for this film, and it's one of the few things in the movie that it's perfection. And the movie as a whole, I find actually, I hold it up to a very high standard, and I do think it's near perfection. But that camera work specifically, and the atmosphere are some of the biggest qualities for me that kind of elevate this film.
Dude, the atmosphere in this film is off the charts at time, and
it is.
And before that, the camera work. I think I'm right in believing that Ridley Scott actually did a lot of the camera work himself, because he was fairly new in terms of directing. He's obviously a bit wet behind the ears, so he wanted to get the shots that he wanted. So he'd take control of the camera where possible, and where they built the Nostromo set, it didn't lend itself to obviously dolly tracks or anything like that. So they had to have this sort of shoulder mounted or handheld or cameras on the helmet type thing. And I agree, it really, really helps with the visual look of this film. And he's talking about atmosphere. It absolutely helps for the atmosphere as well, because we don't see the alien barely. It takes an hour for the alien, for the xenomorph to make any kind of appearance. And even then, he's only got 4 minutes worth of screen time in this film. So, or he or she, I must say. So it's perfect. So we're kind of on this journey with the characters, and that shaky, handheld shoulder camera is perfect for just ramping up the tension, because a lot of people I've seen have called this film, they say it's a bit slow. They say, not really much happens for a lot of it, but that's why it works so much for me, because you're not getting hit in that, like in some of the subsequent sequels, which I think we'll mention later on, but they strive to make you fear the alien because you see it. In this film, you fear it because you don't see it. And that's what works for me so much.
Yes. And speaking about those other sequels, they're kind of at a breakneck pace. And like you said, this movie, depending on, what format you're watching it in, the director's cut or the original, it's about an hour and 50 minutes to 2 hours. And so you not seeing the alien for the first half of the film, it leaves quite an impact on you after you're done watching it, because that chaos that happens, in that second and third act had so much built up, and it's so quiet too in its opening moments. I don't know how you feel about that. Did you feel like in the opening moments of this film, or do you feel any different about it now when you're looking back and you're realizing just how quiet that first act was? Does that help or hurt the second and third act for you?
I think it helps it, because I rewatched the film within the last few days, and I checked on the time. It was like 6 minutes before anyone speaks, which is a long time in film, because if you just sit there and watch a film for 6 minutes with no dialogue, but it's setting the scene, it's setting the atmosphere, it's setting the location, and where our protagonists are going to be spending their entirety of the film for the most part. And by not showing the xenomorph for the first hour, it does that wonderful thing of allowing us to get to know the characters, get into bed with them, find out what they're all about, what their motivations are, who we're going to root for, who we think is going to survive. It doesn't. They're not just an expendable. We find that out, but in terms of the actual characters, they're not just a bunch of Marines or anything thrown to the slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
We get to bond somewhat with the characters because we get a lot of time with them, rather than a few minutes here and there with them and then they get eaten. Yes. So I think it really, really helps the film. Because a lot of the problems I have with any film, but especially horror, is the kind of throwaway characters you get, but the film makes you wants to make you care about them. Whereas what Ridley Scott did was he made you care about them, or at least feel something when they eventually met their end or they escaped.
Yes, and let's keep in mind, too, that unlike the subsequent sequels and, just other films that are in this kind of genre between sci-fi and horror, the characters here are on a commercial mining vessel. They are not Marines. They are not hardened like that. So they're kind of just like your average Joes, when you think about it. And so it kind of puts in perspective, what if you were on this vessel and you were just kind of going about your business, you think you're going to return to Earth, you're woken up, months before your return. And then you have to deal with this xenomorph that's just running about your ship. It seems kind of odd. And and it also gives weight to the fact that these characters, the majority of them die, all of them die. And so it's one of those things that, when you think about it, it makes sense and it doesn't seem out of place.
No, because remember, in space, no one can hear you scream.
That's right.
And that is such a pertinent point, that these guys and gals, they're not warriors, they're not soldiers, they're not, they're workmen, they're engineers, they're technicians. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the idea of them being thrown into space against a xenomorph adds to those stakes slightly more, because when you're sending in the Marines or prisoners, and that you're sending in people with a history, these guys are just there to work. And and Parker, he spends half the film just basically saying, "I want my cut, I just want the money." That's all he's there for. He's not there to kill aliens. He's there to get paid and go home again. Mm-hmm. So it makes the moment later on in the film where Ripley takes charge, when it's only Lambert and Parker left, and Ripley is now taking charge of the whole situation. That makes it more powerful, because these are just your everyday Joes, and it really set up Sigourney Weaver and the character Ripley. And we've got to remember that 7 years later, she received an Academy Award nom for Aliens, which just shows her dedication and qualities within this role. But here obviously is where we get it set up, and I think the character of Ripley is excellent in all manners, in every film, mm-hmm. even Alien 3. But I love the character of Ripley and what she stands for, and seeing her quote-unquote origin in this film was going back and revisiting it, because I haven't watched this film for a while. Oh man, I really dug how she goes from being part of the team to becoming the de facto leader, yes. because of circumstance, but also because of survival. But in terms of Ripley, then, what do you think about the character of Ripley, mainly in this film, but also just the characters themselves? Dallas, Lambert, Kane, and all.
So Ripley is so influential in the horror genre. It kind of is that female, final girl staple, but she's so much more than that in this film. And it really lends to the credibility of Sigourney Weaver as an actress to be able to bring that through, because her change, her arc over the course of these Alien movies is kind of beautiful to watch. And let's not forget that everyone else in the cast is doing an amazing job. I don't think there's one weak link here, including the cat, because that cat is beautiful. And if I had a cat like that, man, I would not be doing the same thing as Ripley later on in the movie when she's trying to escape, throwing that cat carrier all around. I don't know if you caught that, but I was like, oh, whoa, I would not be beating that cat up that much.
She flung it, didn't she?
Yeah. But so Sigourney Weaver is just a treat, and she really is dedicated to the role. There was that play not too long ago, I think last year, put on by a high school production where they did Alien. And I remember her actually showing up to one of those shows. So her dedication to that franchise is, it can't be understated. As far as the rest of the cast goes, someone that always catches my eye when I'm watching this film is Veronica Cartwright's performance, just because it's so subtle. She plays Lambert, and the subtlety of her performance, you can tell that when they're called to, respond to that distress signal, she doesn't necessarily want to go and be on that planet. And she kind of just puts up with it. I think her exact quote was, "It's swell," or something to that effect. But it's the subtlety of her performance before she actually starts expressing that she doesn't want to do things, because she's a pretty quiet character. Yeah. The original script had her be a little bit more upbeat. She was kind of cracking jokes in the original script, and later on they kind of toned her down a little bit. But I think that was the correct decision, because the subtlety of her performance, like I said, it's kind of almost magnetic. And this watch through in the past few days here, I was really just watching her and watching what her character did throughout the story. And I think that she really did an amazing job. I don't know if there was anyone in particular that you picked up on, that you were kind of keeping your eye on the whole film.
It's funny you mentioned Lambert, because I too was watching her throughout, because Ripley and Dallas, Parker, Ash, they've got such a... There's something they're bigger, they're more brash, they're louder. It's easy to watch their performance or feel more compelled to watch them. And Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, she kind of fades into the background, but her, like you say, there's a nuance to her performance, because she isn't just a screeching lady in the background. She is terrified throughout the whole thing, and she is like most people would be. If I was on that ship, I'm not picking up a gun and going charging after the alien. I'd be the one in the background, like her, saying what a bad idea this is and showing it, having to be pushed into actions. I agree. I found myself watching her a lot more, because I didn't realise the first few times just how decent her performance is. And Veronica Cartwright is a good actress anyway. I remember watching in The Birds, the Hitchcock film. But she's a good actress anyway. But her character is just another great addition to, like I mentioned, you get Ripley, who ends up being the boss. Dallas, who is the slightly more cocksure leader. Parker, who's big and brash. Brett, Harry Dean Stanton, God bless his soul, who's a bit... He's just kind of lackadaisical and just like to say right an awful lot. And John Hurt as Kane. Ian Holm, I always think, is Bilbo Baggins. I can't get that out of my head again. The man who's done so many other things, but he's Bilbo Baggins. So there's a lot of big performances there. But Lambert and Veronica Cartwright, it's funny you mentioned that, because I found myself watching her an awful lot in the last viewing, and especially in the scene where the xenomorph finishes off Parker and then goes to kill her. You don't see her death. You later see her kind of like strung up or hanging. But I felt that one to be probably the most tragic of the lot, because she is just terrifying, just beside herself in fear, as he would be. But there was a real genuine feeling to her performance, I thought.
Yes, and during her death sequence, actually, with Parker there, she wasn't actually supposed to die in that moment in the original script. What actually was supposed to happen, she was supposed to basically crawl her way out of that situation and just be so frightened, so terrified that she dies of fright, not necessarily by the xenomorph. So I'm glad they kind of changed that, because I think having her stall there for a moment, with Parker trying to tell her to get out of the way so that he can actually try and stop the xenomorph. I think her just shock, her utter shock in that moment, it makes sense for her character, and I think it's a much more effective way to kill her off than they originally intended.
Yeah, and there's that brilliant shadow / silhouette of the alien approaching Lambert, because they've gone to get coolant whilst Ripley gets the evac ship. Forgive me, I forgot the name of it. Ready, and yeah, there's Lambert is on one side of the air vicinity, and you just see the silhouette of the xenomorph unraveling behind her, and it's one of the most eerie shots of the film, which I completely forgot about. When I was watching, I was like, I do not remember this shot, and that is terrifying. And again, it's partly because it was Lambert, almost the most helpless one, not to degrade the character, because as we just discussed, we actually find her very intriguing, but you know that she's on an absolute hiding now. This is it for her. That's it for anyone. But especially when she turns around and sees that silhouette, and with Parker screaming, get out of the way, get out of the way. And then if I remember, Parker actually attacks the alien. He jumps on the alien to try and stop him, the xenomorph. And then obviously you get that close up of the xenomorph's mouth dripping with KY jelly, and then punches, he bites Parker's face, and it's, not nice. And then Ripley later finds the bodies. But honestly, that particular shot of the shadow was incredible. And in that scene as well, when Ripley is in the ship, when she's looking for Jonesy, there's a great shot, and there's a lot of subliminal shots or in the background, but there's a helmet of one of the characters, and on it, I'm sure there was a face hugger just on it, hiding. We don't see it again, but I swear I saw it on there.
That's an interesting catch. I would have to go back and look at that. But now that you mention, how exhilarating and also horrifying that scene is between Lambert and Parker with the xenomorph, there's another scene that really just makes my skin crawl, and it's actually towards the beginning of the movie with Brett when he is on the search for Jonesy, and he comes across the alien, the xenomorph skin, and that skin is so terrifying to me. It's probably the most terrifying thing that's in the movie because it's just so gross, and the fact that it's shedding its skin and it's evolving so quickly, and they can't, really take even a second to stop searching for it because of its constant evolution. That to me, is so exhilarating for, just as a movie fan and as a horror fan, the fact that you can't catch up to this thing. And it is an apex predator. It speaks volumes to how the film actually holds up in terms of tension. There's not a moment here where I didn't feel the tension. Even the opening title sequence, for that matter, you have that slow crawl opening title sequence. It's one of, I think, the best title sequences that I've ever seen personally. Just the fact that it's, open and it's space and it's so quiet. And we end with that quiet too, just the slow fade out on Ripley's character. But, it's the movie itself is crafted so eloquently, and it's certain instances like that, you have the skin that Brett finds, and then later we circle back to the unraveling of the xenomorph with Parker and Lambert. The xenomorph, while only being on screen for just a few minutes, has a lasting impact, and it's something that the, subsequent sequels have had a hard time managing, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of horror sequels did, like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, to name a few, have had the same problem. When the first film comes out and you create this character like Jason or Freddy Krueger, and then the studio thinks, well, this film made money, people love it, let's make a second one. You immediately want to say, the studio wants, and the public immediately wants to see more of those classic characters now. You want to see Freddy more, you want to see Jason, you want to see the xenomorph, but that always comes at a detriment to the film, I find.
You're right.
A couple of the other films in the Alien franchise, of course, aren't bad at all, one in particular. But there is still that over-reliance on seeing the xenomorph now for those thrills rather than the cat and mouse game that Alien gave us. And I understand a lot of that was budgetary as well. Ridley Scott didn't want to show the xenomorph in full too much because he didn't want it to come across as a bloke in a guy in a suit. But it works wonders, I think. And I've actually got a note, it just says, Brett finds the alien skin. Ew. Because I felt the same thing. I was like, that is horrible, because I'm scared of snakes anyway, so that scared me. But the idea that this thing has gone, it's evolved, and now we don't know as an audience what the hell it is, because we only saw it in the scene earlier on as it ran away. Brett's looking for the cat, for Jonesy. And he's in that fairly conventional area of chains rattling, there's water dripping, but it's all shot so well, again, with those shoulder-mounted cameras, capturing the moment. It feels like, the POV view. Oh, God. And then when he finds Jonesy, Brett, the alien just falls, just unravels behind him again, and it's the first time we really see the alien in its full force, and that is... just the idea of this, like I said, the apex predator, but it's silent. It's not the fact that it's just deadly, and it's got acid for blood, so you can't shoot the bloody thing.
Yeah,
it's deadly quiet as well. And what did you think of the shot of Jonesy staring? Obviously, he's witnessing this, and it's just that shot when it holds on Jonesy's face as he's watching Brett get dragged away by the xenomorph.
Yeah, it's one of the more prominent shots that I remember. And like let's remember too how that scene begins, because this movie and the set specifically is so well crafted, and it's simplistic in places, but I think it's effective. And one of the things is you have this camera, this handheld camera in close quarters. It's oftentimes close. We're getting close-ups of the characters, things like that. And when he enters that room, we get kind of a top-down view, so we're able to see just the scope of where Brett is at in that scene, and it kind of adds a layer of tension because you're thinking about all of the places that the xenomorph could attack from. And how we end that scene is from the POV of a cat, a very small cat in the corner. So I think the juxtaposition of that wide open space that's kind of scary, like you said, chains rattling, things like that, juxtaposed with Jonesy's perspective watching what's happening. I think that moment right there is when the audience and the characters start to feel small compared to the xenomorph. And even though the xenomorph isn't necessarily much bigger than them, obviously the xenomorph has got a little bit of size and a little bit of speed on everyone. But I think that's the moment where the audience kind of turns and realizes just how big of a threat this thing is. Because up till that point, no one really knew how much it was growing. And then the moment we find out how much it has grown, it's kind of too late.
Yep, great use of the word juxtapose as well. Always here for some big English words on this show. On that top-down shot you mentioned, if you look closely in one of the shots, you can actually see the xenomorph in the shot, but obviously you don't know what it looks like at the time. So 1979 audiences wouldn't have seen it because the sort of H.P. Lovecraftian look and the influences throughout that H.R. Geiger managed to create was just horrific. Just the set designs for the most part looking now, the xenomorph almost blends in to the set design, and it's so dark, and it's purposely dark. Obviously, people got headlights on, and they're trying to get through the mist and the shadows, but that ain't working. But in that scene here, you actually see the xenomorph, crouching at a height, kind of hiding. If you go back and watch it, you can see the head very clearly. But again, if you're not looking for that, if you haven't seen what it looks like, then you'll never notice that, because when this film came out, the xenomorph wasn't revealed in any marketing or any promo pre-release. Nobody had any idea what this thing looked like, including the actors for the most part. They didn't know what this fully formed xenomorph looked like. And they're the stories I love hearing about, is especially actors on set not knowing what's coming. So on that note, should we talk about probably the most famous scene in the film?
Yeah, it's an important one, and that was a great segue to it, actually.
Thanks,
Yeah, so obviously when they land on LV-426, the moon planet, they stumble upon this kind of alien ship, and they're not really sure. And what ends up happening is Kane, one of the crew members, actually the first crew member that we see wake up from hypersleep. And that was a beautiful montage too, with the slow fade-ins and fade-outs of his character getting up and moving around. He actually does, kind of intrude on these like egg-shaped, beings that are existing on the floor of this alien ship. And what ends up happening is he gets a face hugger attached to him. No one's really sure what to do with it, because once they get back to the ship, also one of my favorite scenes, when Ripley, the warrant officer of the ship, is in charge now because the commanding officer and the second in command have left the ship. She's talking about quarantine protocols and how she can't break them, how relevant to the times that we're living in now. But while Kane is, being choked essentially by this face hugger, they're trying to figure out a way to get it off. Dallas and Ash specifically are in the room with Kane trying to figure out, can we cut the face hugger off? And of course, they don't call it that. That's just what we call it now. They aren't really successful, because the minute they try and cut that face hugger off, you get that acid blood that goes on, onto the floor, and it burns through the whole of the ship, which is very problematic because, how are we supposed to get this thing off? So they just kind of have to sit it out and wait. And of course, when Kane does eventually wake up and the face hugger has died, no one's really sure what to do. They think it's kind of just a one-off situation, nothing that we really have to worry about now, obviously, because Kane is awake and Kane is walking. He doesn't necessarily remember what had happened to him, while on LV-426, but he, is optimistic.
He seems fine.
Yes, he seems fine. Everyone's having a good time. They're talking about how long it's going to take them to get back to Earth. Maybe we should have one more meal. He's really hungry. So they decide that they should have one last meal before they go back into hypersleep. And we all know how this turns out, Matt.
Wow. Watching it again, I was surprised as how stark and as brutal that scene is. And the build-up is so good. From when they find the eggs with that wonderful kind of blue laser light above it and the mist, then when they bring Kane back, and Ripley will not let them in, which is the right thing to do, and it's Ash, isn't it, who opens the door, and this is before we know of Ash's intentions. And then everything about those scenes, so they find out that the face hugger is actually injecting itself, or has inserted itself inside of Kane, and there's obviously the metaphor there for sexual assault, which is something which is prevalent in these franchise. So that was something they were mentioned as well. But we'd never seen this face something as horrible as this, like this alien. Yeah, and then Kane makes a quick recovery. He's suddenly very hungry. Then he starts to choke on his food. And then he starts to convulse in absolute agony. And then blood starts to appear on his T-shirt. And this is what I love about, as I mentioned, the crew knew something was going to happen, as far as I'm aware. I believe the crew knew that an alien was going to emerge, but I'm not sure to what extent they knew how, and they certainly didn't know there's going to be blood and guts anywhere. So all of the reactions, especially Veronica Cartwright's, were genuine, and I love that. And it's the moment, and when you see Kane so brutally convulsing, and then the first splash of blood comes out, and you see his T-shirt just push up from the chest, and the horrible noises as the alien is moving around, and then bang, you see the alien come out, and the blood spurts all over Veronica. She's screaming. Everyone's gone back, taking a step back, and it's absolutely just whoa at this moment. And of course, the little alien looks around and runs off. Can you imagine sitting in the cinema in 1979, no idea what the hell is coming, and seeing that? Because even now, it holds up. It's practical and it holds up. So imagine in 1979, what is now one of the most iconic scenes in horror, sci-fi and horror. Can you imagine watching that in 1979?
I wish I could go back. If you know where the nearest time machine is, I will gladly send myself back to the theater for that one, because, yeah, like you said, it's iconic in every way. The reactions are genuine. The practical effects are on point. And you don't really notice them either in this film, whether we're talking about Ash's demise later on, or we're talking about this scene specifically. The movie does a very good job with practical effects and using them very sparingly, but it holds up. And one of my favorite things about that scene specifically is when we finally do get that full shot of the alien emerging from his chest. And obviously at this point, Kane is dead, and you can see him, in the background kind of twitching and still convulsing a little bit. And that moment that we hold on that shot pretty much stuck with me. It's a moment I think about a lot when I think about this movie in particular and the franchise in particular. And I'm dishing out the hot takes here, but I don't think that there's been a more effective or better death, for that matter, in this franchise than Kane's.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any off the top of my head. There have been some brutal ones, and there's been some pretty cool ones in terms of just like starkness, though, because a lot of, as you mentioned, the six subsequent sequels take things, they take things up a notch or two, almost unnecessarily, to kind of top a scene like this. And there is a scene I could think of. Again, I'll mention that later on, but even then, it's not quite as effective as this particular scene, the Chestburster. And it's not even because it's the first one. Nothing's sacred, nothing can't be beaten, but it's the reactions, it's the fact that before this happened, we'd seen the face hugger, but then we see it dead. We see Kane's fine. Of course, we can be lulled into a false sense. And before that, there's Dallas has given authorization to transport the dead hugger back for testing, because they've had a little look at its squelchy parts, which look disgusting. and there's a tension as they leave the moon with a dead, mysterious alien on board. So there's that tension going on. There's the fact that Kane has had this on his face, and now he seems to be fine. Then that happens. So the build up to it, it's not just a moment, it's the build up and everything before it. It's why I think it's the best in the franchise. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that jumps out immediately. So as far as I'm concerned, I fully agree with you. It's the best one of the lot. And then Kane's body is just like jettisoned into space, really unceremoniously, just flung out into space. But there's probably no nice way of doing that. There's another scene before that I really like as well. It's when they find the space jockey, or as they called it on production, the space jockey, like the pilot of the crashed ship, and its icky remains, which we now know, I think, is the origins of the engineers from Prometheus. And it's, at the same time, Mother, the ship's internal system, which originally thought that the signal was an SOS call. At the same time, they find this space jockey, and they're looking at it, and one of them says, "Oh, it looks like it exploded from the inside," which is a nice bit of foreshadowing. At the same time, Mother codes the distress signal and finds that as a warning and not an SOS. You've got this great interplay and interchanging scenes of the gang in and around this space jockey, finding this alien equipment, and then they find the eggs. And at the same time on the ship, we find out that this wasn't an SOS call, it was a bloody warning. Brilliant, brilliant build-up. And then, of course, that then leads into the face hugger, which then leads into the chestburster scene. So that, 20, 25 minutes is just, it's like chef's kiss.
And the silence, while they're exploring the engineer ship, the space jockey ship, I think adds a whole other element to the whole entire sequence. Like we said before, this movie, it isn't afraid of quiet. It isn't afraid of silence. And because of that, we can get scenes like Kane's death, like Brett's death, all the deaths for that matter, that feel very brutal in nature because up till that point, it's been quiet, it's been slow. The exploration of not only the engineer ship, but also just of, the opening sequences on the Nostromo, right? The atmosphere on that ship, has not been replicated to that extent in the franchise moving forward. I don't know if you ever experienced this, or do you play games a lot at all?
If you're talking about the Alien game, if you're going to mention that.
Yeah, Isolation.
Yes, it scared the shit out of me. Absolutely. I've only played it a few times, and I've got no shame in saying this. I'm too scared, it's too frightened to go back and play it.
Well, they had that crew expendable add-on to that game where basically you played as the original crew, and they brought the voice actors back, which I thought was really cool. Mm-hmm. It was the crew expendable add-on, and you're trying to jettison the alien in the airlock, but you could play as Dallas, you could play as Ripley, nice. And they nailed that atmosphere so much. It's completely different when you're sitting there yourself and you're playing as the character trying to make decisions and stuff. But it's very similar to what the movie itself does. I get the same feeling in the game that I do from the film, and the replication there is so crucial for making an alien game or just even a good survival horror game. But it has moments of quietness in it. And, speaking on behalf of the movie now, like I said, that quiet in all of these scenes, especially when you have that, those added effects on set, like those blue, stage lights, essentially, that they borrowed from The Who, by the way. Nice. So, those blue lights, it creates an environment in which, many people probably hadn't experienced before. And then, when you're talking about sci-fi, that's what it's all about. It's all about the new experiences, about the innovation. And they do it with very little here. It's very scarce, but it's so effective.
Yeah, and the silence is, and I don't mean to bash on contemporary horror quite so much, so I seem to do that quite a lot, but that's something which new horror films or sci-fi could learn an awful lot. It's not needing to have any music in the background or even anything, just the ambient noise or the natural noise or just silence or just the characters talking. It lends itself to much better atmosphere, a creepier atmosphere, more tense atmosphere because we could have had lots of dialogue between the characters as they were investigating the ship or beforehand, talking very technical terms and all the lingo and the jargon. But no, we didn't. It felt more realistic to have just people working quietly, or the moments of silence in this film are there for a reason. We don't need it to be intercut with scenes of people talking through headsets and military people and whatnot, because it's adding another layer to which you don't need. The simplicity of this film is what works the most, and it is very simplistic, and that is in no way a detriment to the film or Ridley Scott's work. It's a very simplistic approach to how he does it, but it's so bloody effective. And I mean, the influences are there. Space Odyssey, 2001, obviously. Close Encounters, Star Wars, of course, which had just come out, and 20th Century Fox were thinking, right, we want another hit on our hands. And the opening as you mentioned, that really classic opening with the title Alien slowly appearing, and you've got Jerry Goldsmith's excellent eerie score, and then you've got like a very Star Warsy opening as the ship flies overhead, and the cameras are underneath watching it go over the top of it, like the classic shot from A New Hope. And after that, you get like a minute or two of nothing but just establishing shots of the grubby interior of the ship, kind of like second unit or B-roll type thing almost, of just showing like here's a control panel, here's a set of steps, here's a hallway. Nothing more than just very, very simple shots, just so we can see what we're dealing with. And like you say, nothing, no silence, no discussion, no dialogue. Jerry Goldsmith's score in the background, and that's it. And then you get a beautiful shot of Kane waking up, and the slow fades in and out with that as well. The use of silence in this film is outstanding, and I know we mentioned that off the top, but I don't think it ever goes without saying, because even in the attack scenes or the death scenes or the finale, we're not hit in the face with music. We're not hit in the face with anything more than we need to be. There's a great moment where, well, it's not a great moment, but when Dallas, before Dallas is killed, he's going through the vents and the hatches with his flamethrower. And as the hatches close, they really scrape, the metal scrapes and whines to get, and I love that. Again, there's no music, it's just that horrific scraping of the metal, and that speaks more to me than any kind of musical jolt. And that scene itself, I quite enjoy. Like they've been talking about something's in the third junction, obviously it's the xenomorph, but Lambert's lost signal on her tracker, so she's given him the wrong directions. It turns out the alien's heading towards him, and you get that great line, "Move, Dallas, get out of there. It's heading towards you." And obviously the alien stretches his arms in front of him. So I like the sound design in that very, very much. What did you think about Dallas's death and the shot of the alien with his arms outstretched?
It's so quick. That is such a quick moment, and then it goes to that static and then to silence. So the editing there, the cuts, the way they lined up that transition is magnificent. It's actually quite impeccable. The use of diegetic sound here, and what I think back to when I think of diegetic sound is that metal scraping as those ducts close. I also think about when Ripley is trying to escape at the end and she's set that self-destruct sequence. And you have that alarm, that very distinct alarm sound. And that's really all there is in the background. So the sound mixing here is really good. I think it's probably one of the stronger aspects of the film as a whole, besides the screenplay, I would argue. But Dallas's death is probably amongst one of the other most iconic moments from this film. It's one I see a lot when I think of, whether you're watching, Watch Mojo top 10 best moments in the Alien franchise or anything like that, it always is up there on people's lists. And for a very good reason. He's alone in that moment, and no matter, when Ripley is trying to get people to, she's ordering them to go in pairs. She's, Dallas is the captain of the ship, and I get why it was a very, reasonable and noble action for him to go into the ducts alone to try and draw the xenomorph out. But at the same time, that feeling of being alone even starts to wear on him, you see. He's very subtle in it, but specifically when she says, I think the line is, you're going the wrong way, like, don't go that way, or something to that effect. Right there, my heart sinks every time because he even realizes it, and he's not, too expressive about it even. So it's a very, nuanced and kind of low key performance there, and it's great by Tom Skerritt. And the whole sequence after that, with just the silence, it's very emotional almost, because you can see the look of distress on the crew's face once their captain dies. But you can also see it on his face right as he's about to die. He's just not that expressive about it. And I think, again, that's more effective than this huge moment that we have where someone's, running around the ducks screaming, trying to escape. He's very just calm and collective about it, but at the same time, you can tell he's so frightened. And that kind of sticks with you afterwards.
He's resigned, isn't he? He's resigned to his fate. Once he realises Lambert was giving him... Once he realised that Lambert's signal went on her tracker and he's been going the wrong way and that something's heading towards him, like you say, you can see it on his face, he's resigned to his fate. It's fight or flight or, live or die basically now. And when you don't know what you're up against, when you know you're up against an apex predator with acid for blood and you've only got a flamethrower in a very small vent, chances are you're not getting out alive. And yeah, when the crew realises that, their captain has fallen, they're leaderless, they're rudderless now, that's the kind of the WTF moment for them. We're like, wow, what do we do now? It's when Ripley decides, well, I'm going to take charge now. It's a very well done scene, and they could have easily had some kind of pulsating music, dun 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 dun, dun, in the background to kind of ramp up the tension and make you feel like something's going to happen, something's coming. But you don't need to do that. You don't need to. In this film, it does it so well. And I don't mean to sound like a snob or anything, but there's so many films you watch when you think, I wish we'd just gone for the less is more approach. And a lot of the more successful or critically acclaimed recent horror films have done that. The whole less is more, the Babadook or Hereditary, they've gone for that more stripped back approach. And it works. And in a film like Alien, it absolutely does, because Dallas's death could have been overplayed, it could have been overdrawn, they could have gone full gore. But it's the lack of what you see, like pretty much all of the deaths almost, it's what you don't see, which is scary. It's seeing Jonesy watching, and then you can't see what he's watching, but just the cat's just staring. Hearing the static when you know that Dallas is gone now, you're not quite sure how he's gone. Same with Lambert. You see her hanging, or you see her feet anyway, or she's got no trousers on. So I know God knows what's happened to her. But you don't know what's happened, and that's what's scarier. And again, later on they start to show what the alien can do. But honestly, the more stripped back approach for this is excellent. It's excellent, and it's coming at the same time now when we find out Ripley, when she talks to Mother. I love this scene when she overrides the security measures, and she finds out that the Nostromo was rerouted for you Americans to new coordinates to to find the alien, to gather the life form, which became the priority. All other considerations secondary. Big capital letters, crew expendable. That's it.
Yes.
They're in the wrong system anyway. They thought they received an SOS call and they had to go and check it. They were contractually obliged to investigate, or they'd lose all of the crew would lose all of their fee. They'd forfeit their share of the money. So they had to go and do it. So the company, Weyland Yutani, had them over a barrel. And when Ripley finds out the crew is expendable, then suddenly, well, hold on, this is why Ash was acting so strange the whole time. This is why Ash let them in. This is why he's been so reticent to kill the alien every chance he's had. I love that moment. Again, the way that Sigourney Weaver sells it is it's understated to a point, because obviously she's showing how pissed off she is, but it isn't all guns blazing. She seems like somebody who's just seen the worst news she could possibly find. And I think I like the way she carries that, and the way Ian Holm also then subsequently plays out the next scenes. But I love that moment when they find out that they're expendable.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to that, because I was just going to jump off onto that point. Like I said, with Dallas's death, the moment that she says, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," Lambert to Dallas, my heart sinks. That's another scene when Ripley is finally, in command, and she has control of Mother, and she can get the answers that she's been kind of, searching for the whole movie. And they get to that moment where, priority one, ensure return of organism for analysis, all other considerations secondary, crew expendable. The spacing of that sequence that they have on the computer there is so effective. And it's another moment where my heart just sunk, because the moment that she leans back in the chair, we get that reveal of Ash right next to her. It's not necessarily a jump scare, but it's an effective, like, oh, hey, something's obviously not right. It kind of, gives the cue to the viewer that something's quite shady. And even if you had picked up on it before, it's very prevalent now. And I think we can give credit for all of those sequences, or a lot of them anyway, to Dan O'Bannon, who did the screenplay. Because the company storyline here is so, I've used this word a lot in this episode, but you know what, this is what it is for this movie. But it's so subtle and it's so like low key about everything. The subsequent sequels, and we can talk about this, kind of make it a big point to touch on the company, to touch on Wayland Yutani and, the big shady corporation. But this is kind of a subplot here. I mean, it's a big part of the story, but they treat it in the story, in the script, as such a subplot that it's so subtle when it finally does, get revealed that something is, kind of shady going on with the company itself. And I think that's where you get those really strong sci-fi, that sci-fi experience comes in, is, talking about the company, and moving forward with the other sequels, it's a huge part of it. But like I said, in this one, they kind of keep it toned down, and I appreciate that so much more, because it kind of brings that mystery into the plot, and into the fold in Alien, as if it wasn't already there before. But it kind of adds, layers upon layers, and the spacing of when these events happen throughout the film, of when we get more information, and where we get the information too, for that matter, is all important, and it's all impactful.
Yep, and it adds layers and layers, but without becoming convoluted, without then taking the big bad company, the faceless company, and it doesn't run with it, like you say in this film. It's just there. You now know that all of this is being controlled by a corporation who are safely, thousands of light years away, who are treating their engineers like pond life. And Ash was in on it the whole time. And they could have gone into it in this film. They could have had a scene of Ash really diving into it a lot more. But what we got was enough to make you, like I say, bring chill to your bones. You're 10 months from Earth. Mm-hmm. You're stuck on the ship with a life form which the company wants, and they'll do anything they can to get it. Imagine you're in that situation where you've been sent to do a job, and the next thing you know, hours later, you're fighting for your life, and the company has no interest in whether you live or die or not. They just want the thing that's trying to kill you. Mm-hmm. Especially when it's Ripley who finds it, because you find yourself becoming engaged with Ripley. You find yourself gravitating towards her. It's a big moment in the film. And it's a great reveal. And again, it's almost understated in the way it's done. You don't have the twirling moustache villain. It's just Ash standing there, Ian Holm, in his very, very calm British way, explaining, as he's an android anyway, what's going on. And then when he then attacks Ripley, like, he beats her, he's throwing her around like nobody's fault. And it's Parker. Parker knocks his head off with a fire extinguisher, which we get some more action here. But Ripley, Ash was trying to choke Ripley with a magazine down her throat, which is, if anything, it's resourceful. If you're going to kill someone, shove a magazine down their throat. I've obviously never tried it, but I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, then Parker whacks his head off, and again, that would have been a surprise to audiences, because there's nothing to say in the film that Ash is an android or a robot, apart from the moment where when Ripley attacks Ash, he has that white stuff dripping from his head. And then he starts throwing Ripley around, but there's nothing to say that he's an android. So again, what did you think of the revelation that Ash is actually, not that he's just complicit with the company, he's also not human?
Yeah, it was probably a shock to the system for those audiences. I know that there was a usher in London, I believe, who actually fainted during that sequence. But it's one of those situations where, again, we talk about the revelations that we get throughout this movie. It's such an important one, and it kind of makes you question the motives for every other character who's still alive, right? Obviously they, Parker and Lambert help, Ripley kind of fend off Ash and defeat Ash ultimately. but you kind of have to wonder then, where were everyone else's motives? And it adds an additional layer where then, and we've been getting this throughout the whole entire movie, how the crew is kind of butting heads with each other, and obviously if you're spending a long period of time with these people, and you're isolated like that in space, you're going to get to a point where things become tense, things become heated just because you've been around them too long. We've had countless horror movies with that concept alone, just the obvious one right off the top of my head, you have The Shining. But you also have something as recent as The Lodge, for that matter. And those movies work best with that tension. That the actual moment that we have with Ripley asking Ash questions is so frightening, so frightening. And not only because Ash is an android, but he's still kind of being a little rude. Specifically, he says, quote, "I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies," which is one of the, I think the most prominent quotes that we hear when we talk about Alien, the "you have my sympathies" line. Because it's essentially he's saying I, have no regrets about what I did. I was ordered to do this because I'm programmed this way. And it's kind of the same situation with Mother, right? Their AI. She's just programmed to follow orders from the company and there's nothing you can do about it. But that kind of smug line, the "you have my sympathies," it's oh man, they're done. They're toast. There's no way they can get out of this. So it kind of adds that to it as well, where really do they have any chance of making it off this ship?
Oh, you are a boss man for bringing up that line, because I have that highlighted, not just highlighted, but highlighted in blue, because I think that's such a great line. "I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies." And he gives such a smug smile afterwards, just before
Yes.
Ripley whacks him one. Bit dodgy editing on that moment, and the one I saw. And then obviously Parker sets him alight, which is a nice, if you're gonna melt an android, do it like that. But yeah, that is such a great line. But it is literally a case of even the androids, if we've learned anything from droids and C-3PO, they've got us for everything. And this android's basically saying you've got no chance. But here's a sympathy card and some flowers to see the carcass. Yep. It's a great, great, great line. And yeah, when he's describing the xenomorph and his utter admiration for it, it makes what came before, the previous moments in the film with Ash, so much more impactful now. When they're working on Kane, and they're like, "Why don't we freeze it, or why don't we kill him?" And he's like, "No, let's not be too hasty. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Now, in hindsight, in retrospect, wow, we know we know why he's doing that, and it's so much more powerful to think the whole time he was behind it. And even Mother turns against him in the end. When she's asked to sort the coolant, she doesn't even do anything about it. But I like the idea of the Mother is a very sci-fi aspect of the film. Yeah, just having
very
this,
2001,
exactly, this AI which you can speak to and it does everything for you, or it supposedly does. And it's that great little room. I never mentioned that. A kind of little sphere where they go in. Again, the very 2001 room, where white sphere with the flashing yellow LEDs going on and off on the walls. Very kind of Kubrick-like look to it, visual to that. And so I liked that when they go into that little sphere. But yeah, honestly, that line from Ian Holm and Ash just sets up the final act, I think, perfectly, which is pretty much, unless you've got anything else in the film to talk about, I think the final act is where we'll go to.
Yeah, we can go to the final act. And one thing quick before we get there, you did say that there was a little bit dodgy editing there with Ash's head, and I got that too. We'll talk about it later, but it's one of the very few things that I have wrong, with this film at all. But as good of a film it is, I can kind of move on from it.
Yep, and I know this isn't for a film that won Best Visual Effects, the Oscar. It won the Best Visual Effects Oscar. So let's not forget Alien is a Academy Award-winning film. Little, even though it's not editing, little hiccups here and there. We'll let go. It's also nominated for Best Production Design as well. So it's a winner and a nominee from the Academy Award. So it got some love. But I'm sure there'll be a few things we weren't so keen on. But yeah, so that ending then, and it begins with Ripley with a flamethrower. And do you know what I love about that scene? I'll let you take that scene away. But Ripley with a flamethrower, she looks genuinely terrified of the predicament she's in. Sigourney Weaver brings it. She looks genuinely like you're watching, like a voyeur watching someone actually trapped on a ship with an alien after them. She looks genuinely scared, and I love the final third.
Yeah, but again, at the same time that she looks terrified, it looks like she's willing to do what's ever necessary to live, just survive. Nothing more than that. Her directive in the last, act of this film is simply just to survive. And like, there are no ulterior motives there with her. And like I said, I brought it up earlier, she does make sure that Jonesy's okay. She gets Jonesy in a little pet carrier. But basically she has to try and somehow escape the Nostromo before it self-destructs. Yeah. And while she's doing that, she's going down these long corridors. The alarm, the Nostromo alarm is going off, so it's diegetic sound there. And she looks frightened. She's kind of moving around very rapidly, kind of quick motions, not really sure where to look, not really sure what to do. But all she knows is that she has to survive. And her with the flamethrower, we get it even more in the sequel, but I love it. I love to see Sigourney Weaver wielding that flamethrower. It is one of the few joys that I have when it comes to actual horror movies. I like horror movies a lot, but there aren't too many moments that in a horror movie where I'm like, yeah, like keep doing you. And that's one of them. And it's even more prominent in the sequel. But obviously, she's trying to fend off the alien in any way that she can. She doesn't know where it is, although she does see it at one point. And she's kind of going through these corridors, and she does a little bit of retracing. She goes one way, and then she kind of, tracks back a little bit, and then she goes back that way. So, where do I go in this instance, right? I think it's a big part of the third act. Where do I go?
I love that shot you mentioned where she's about to make a run for the ship, the evac ship. Again, I can't remember the name of it. And standing in the way, it just happens to be an 8-foot xenomorph. And again, her face when she's really slowly starts to creep away and just retrace tracks. I love that because again, it's the kind of like, crap, where do I go from here? I can't even get off the bloody ship. Plus, you've got the diegetic noise of the alarm, the really unsettling alarm. I don't know if they did any work to try and ascertain a certain pitch for those alarms, but they really go through. Mm-hmm. They're affecting noise, and that there's a time limit as well, and that Jonesy's out there somewhere. Did the alien eat Jonesy? Turns out he didn't. Thank God for that. But I love that kind of. It is the whole film's cat and mouse, but this is a proper cat and mouse now. There's one xenomorph and there's one Ripley, and she's got to get to that ship before the whole thing blows up. I really, really like how that's played out, and again, the use of on-camera sound, the use of the score, and the use of the diegetic sound, as you say, all works so well. There isn't that kind of like thumping soundtrack or score, to remind you that this is a tense moment, guys. It's all there in the moment, in the scene, in the acting, in the performances, and in the situation. That is all you need. And I love it. I really genuinely do. And obviously then she gets onto the ship. Firstly she gets Jonesy, as you say. She got Jonesy. Jonesy's fine. He shoves him in this little cat box, and quickly chucks him in the ship, and then literally does throw him to the side.
She does. She does.
And you think everything's okay, don't you, when she gets on that ship? I mean, you meant to think that, but when she gets on that ship, you kind of like, this is excellent. Everything's fine as she blasts off.
Mm-hmm. And while she blasts off, that sequence where the Nostromo is being blown up, and then it kind of holds for a second, and then it keeps destructing. I thought that was another moment where the editing might have been a little bit choppy, maybe prolonged a bit too much. So that was another kind of markdown that I had. Probably the only other one that I had from the film, actually. But after that, we get this really quiet moment with Ripley where she's kind of just reflecting. But of course that can't be the end, because we have a stowaway. The xenomorph has found a way on the evac ship, and she slowly makes her way over to the spacesuits, and it's one of the most nail-biting like sequences in the film where she's trying to put on the spacesuit that way she can blow out the xenomorph, into space, jettison the xenomorph, if you will. And while she's putting on that suit, I was sitting there and I was like thinking to myself, please don't make any sound. Please don't make any sound. Like, you're being loud. Please don't do that. Like, obviously she has no other choice but to put on the suit. So she's going to be loud one way or the other. But she does get a weapon. She gets a harpoon gun of sorts, and she is able to at least get the suit on, open the hatch, let the xenomorph kind of jettison out of the airlock. But of course, the xenomorph isn't going to go out that easily. It holds on for dear life until she's able to shoot it with her harpoon. But that's not all, obviously, because when she does that, she closes the airlock, but the gun is stuck inside of the evac ship with her, leaving the xenomorph kind of dangling outside of the ship in space with the harpoon gun. That atmosphere obviously isn't a problem for the xenomorph, so it finds a way to kind of climb back on board, doesn't actually get inside, and from that, she's able to kind of jettison him even more off into space through using the thrusters. A brilliant move by Ripley, kind of a last-ditch effort, and it works.
Did you think the xenomorph was dying in the wall? Because I've read a lot of people saying that they thought the xenomorph basically was just found a nice warm place to die, because it didn't attack her, did it? It shot its hand. It shot its hand out of the wall when she went too close, but it didn't try to attack her. She had enough time to hide, and she's kind of watching it in all its kind of glory as well, with its mouth open and extending and dribbling everywhere. She's kind of watching it, not in any kind of admiration, but just taking it in before she puts the suit on. But did you think that the alien was on its way out, or why did it not attack her?
I do think that it was probably hurt in some way. I mean, you've got to imagine going through those air ducts trying to get on that evac ship probably was a little difficult for it. So I imagine at some point it got stuck somewhere, maybe got hurt a little bit. And obviously we can't see that because a lot of the xenomorph is off screen. So it's something that you kind of have to just use your imagination with. And I kind of like that about that because, while I was sitting there through this watch through specifically, I did think about that a few times. And I do believe that, it probably wasn't trying to attack her. It was probably just trying to survive at that point, just like her. And so I think that moment brought the xenomorph down to her level. So that she could finish the job. Because had it still been in that apex state, I don't think she would have had a chance.
No. If that's a fully functioning alien, she's gone. She's alien breakfast. She's she's Ripley on toast. But it's a great dichotomy. Yes. It's a great parallel. The fact that they're both trying to survive, and who's going to. But it is a case. It is a test of attrition. Who's going to come out on top? And when she coaxes the alien out, doesn't she? She's singing the old Francis Langford song, "You Are My Lucky Star," which she's singing, which apparently costs a lot of money as well for the studio to license. But she's singing that. She's coaxing it out by she's got the steam or something. She's got trying to get this alien out, and it finally thinks, "Oh, for Christ's sake, I was trying to have die, but I will get up and attack you if I must." And then she blasts it into space. But like I say, it's that bit where the harpoon gun is stuck on the door, and the xenomorph tries to climb back in. It's almost like, how do you kill this bloody thing? And then she finally does get rid of it, and it's a great tense moment, nail-biting moment. And we get a brilliant end shot of this is Ripley, the last survivor of the Nostromo, and she gives a final brief before signing off and going into space sleep, hypersleep. And we don't get a jump scare. We don't get a shot of the alien kind of watching her at the end or anything like that. It just fades to the end credits, and I love that because, again, in a film which, if you're going to set up a franchise, in that final shot, you see something in the background just move to make you think, "Oh, she's not alone." In this, you don't, because it's a standalone film, and I like that it worked. They gave it this ending and not the alternative endings that Ridley Scott wanted, because they were a lot different. And I think this is the best one of the lot. Did you know about any of the alternative ones?
Oh yeah, it was supposed to be much darker than originally shot, and I do know that 20th Century Fox reps, the studio executives, did not want it at all. They wanted it to be a little bit more drawn out, a little bit peaceful, and the fact that he came up with that kind of fourth act, almost, if you will, on the evac ship, I think that is probably the best ending that it possibly could have had, because the other endings, essentially Ripley was going to die. And, it was just going to be a situation where there were no survivors, and it was dark. And I think that the ending that we got was still a little dark. Obviously, her whole crew's dead. But we end right where we begin, essentially. We have that slow fade in space. It's really quiet. And we end with that same silence, on the fade out with the camera holding on Ripley. She's alone. So I think personally for me, that's dark enough, and they didn't need to go any further.
Yeah, I think it would have cheapened the ending somewhat if they'd had her be killed off in a way like that. Also, you certainly wouldn't have been getting the sequels; wouldn't have been anywhere near as good. So, in terms of the sequels and the story, it ended up being quite a good thing that they didn't do it. But you know what? I think it works better that they didn't. So, I think there are major moments, and for a film which was originally going to be called Space Beast, and has a lot of sexual overtones, like the phallic chestburster, the face hugger, which looks very much like a vagina. Alien itself is a great movie. Did you have any other major moments or best moments you wanted to talk about?
I didn't have anything on my end. I think I actually was able to cover all of them.
That's because Jared is a pro. You mentioned a couple of the moments which didn't quite stand up for you, and the editing. Did you want to mention anything more about them, or any other moments which didn't quite, stand up?
Nothing for me. Like I said, the editing, with the ass cheek sequence, that was a little bit choppy. With the other sequence, it would have been fine had they just cut it down a little bit, just a few seconds, just shave off a few seconds from it, and it wouldn't have seemed so prolonged. I get that it was supposed to be a climactic moment where, she's escaping and they want to hold that shot of her in the evac ship, just kind of, it almost looks like she's kind of praying there for a moment. And I get why they wanted to hold on that for a little bit, but I think it might have just been a couple seconds too long. Did you have anything that you found throughout the movie that you had problems with?
Not really. Do you know what I mean? A couple. We get the first jump scare when Ripley and Dallas are with Ash and watching over Kane when a bit of equipment falls down. And then we get a couple more regarding Jonesy, and I think they had one too many jump scares regarding the cat. I think they played that up a bit too much. But again, that's nothing bad. And I guess a scene at the end of just Ripley in her pants, because a bit pointless really, seems a bit pervy.
Yes.
I get why they did it, because she's about to go to hypersleep and they want to lull you into the fact that this is it now. But it did seem a bit odd that they do that. But still, it's not something which ruins the film, and there's nothing in it which ruins the film. Some of the editing's a bit choppy, or today's standard is very noticeable, like the moment with Ash's head. It cuts from Ian Holm to the prosthetic very jarringly. But
yes,
that's just a film from the time, unfortunately. It's something that I'm sure if Ridley Scott really wanted to, probably could change that now, or he could CGI or enhance it somewhat. But that's also the charm of these kind of films as well, that everything isn't perfect. And just before I move on anyway, something about this film I love as well, and this is going to sound proper sort of Luddite, but I always gravitate more towards these older films which are shot on actual film, because it lends a certain quality. I mentioned voyeuristic earlier on, but it lends a certain quality to films like this, because the newer films, all shot on digital in the alien world, they have a sheen to them, which then the polish and the sheen and the they look beautiful, but it takes something away from the overall experience. And again, a lot of the horror films from the 70s benefit from this grain as well, and the 80s. But I love the way this film looks. So I thought I'd just chuck that in. But in terms of worst moments, or quote unquote worst moments that didn't quite stand up, nothing major whatsoever for me. So I'm glad that we see eye to eye on that one.
Yeah. And like you said, analog is just fantastic. Anytime that we're shooting, an actual film on analog film, it's just, I think it adds a level of realism to the whole thing. The rustic kind of feeling of the Nostromo and the kind of claustrophobic nature of that ship is enhanced by analog. And when you're talking about something like as recent as Alien Covenant, which just feels very off the charts compared to how the other films have presented themselves, specifically, Alien 1979 and then Aliens, James Cameron's film. It just feels a little bit jarring to me. And again, a lot of that is pacing, and a lot of that is the studio, and it's a common occurrence in horror films, the film is always going to be as good. And we even talked about it when we were, doing comic casts and talking about superheroes. The film is only as good as the villain. And that still, remains true even with a franchise like Alien, because at the same time that, the first Alien kind of had sparse, usage of the actual xenomorph, the reason why the studio wants to pack the xenomorph in there, in the newer movies is because you're paying to see the xenomorph, It's not original anymore, and you can kind of capitalize on that. So nothing will ever, have that same atmosphere, that same vibe that the original Alien does. But, I got to be honest, while I didn't necessarily like Alien Covenant, I thought Prometheus was okay. And I'm not sure how you felt about all the sequels, but for me, there have been some good and there have been a lot of bad.
Pretty much the same. And I think it's a great point that you mentioned about, just a film lives or dies by its villain. And Alien gave us a classic antagonist in the Xenomorph and a classic protagonist in Ripley. And the two go hand in hand, which is probably why the sequels that came after found ways to bring Ripley back into it, because the two, seeing a Xenomorph against something other than Ripley, it almost doesn't feel like Alien now. And I know that's counterintuitive to expanding a franchise, but the two are so intertwined now. But yeah, in terms of the newer films and the Alien Covenant, I didn't mind Alien Covenant. I thought it was solid. I think it was great. But I thought it was clear that after Prometheus, Ridley Scott either wanted to or he was told to go back to some kind of basics or to give the people more of an Alien-esque film. I think it's quite clear that there was some kind of memo left in his desk which basically said, enough of this engineer shit, give us the Xenomorph. And I think that's what they did. So Covenant I didn't mind, and I had the backburster scene, which was what I was referring to earlier on. I thought the backburster scene was horrifically well done, but there's something about it hasn't got quite the same luster as the chestburster scene, even if it is probably a lot more visceral and more gory to watch. The chestburster scene works better for me because of the build-up, because of the time spent getting to know the characters. Prometheus, you know what? In all honesty, I do need to rewatch that. I've seen it twice when it came out, once when it came out, and once probably about 6 years ago, dude, and the first time I watched it, I was slightly confused as to what I was watching. The second time, I had a greater appreciation for it because I understood what Ridley Scott was going for. For me, I don't think he executed it as well as he maybe wanted to. I think a lot of the idea in his head didn't quite translate to the screen. It's a very, very ambitious film, which I applaud him for.
It is.
But I do want to go back and rewatch it because I think a lot of people have gone back to it and have said, you know what, actually, there's a lot of good in this, and I know there's a lot of good performances and a lot of big stars in it as well, but I'd like to go back and watch Prometheus. So in terms of, you've just said you quite enjoy it. Tell me about Prometheus and why you enjoy it, because I need to be jogged into watching it.
The same reason that many people, especially fans of, the Alien franchise, have problems with it is kind of why I gravitate towards it. The ambition behind it. The fact that you're in a completely new environment with completely new details and you're expanding the base of the franchise. While not all of it worked, even for me, I do believe that effectively by making Alien Covenant and by having, the engineers and Elizabeth Shaw killed off in such a way where you're just basically saying, oh, I know I made that last movie, but I don't want to anymore because the studio told me not to. Basically is how Alien Covenant came off to me. And so for me, Prometheus was just a lot of new information and a lot to ponder, a little bit choppy in some places, specifically with dialogue, a little confusing at times. I thought we were going back to the basics. And, as far as the stars in Alien Covenant go, I like everyone who was basically in Alien Covenant and even Prometheus. Like the casting for both of those, I thought was actually decent enough. But the fact that you have, Naomi Rapace, and she's not even basically in Alien Covenant at all. She's in some of the marketing material leading up to the actual theatrical release, but basically they just they just take her out entirely. And, you know, she is not as strong of a character as Ripley was, but I saw what they were going for. She's a scientist. She had ambition. She wanted to do her job. Obviously, Michael Fassbender is probably the most interesting portion, the interesting character of that specific franchise, trilogy, whatever you want to call it. I think I just read a report the other day that Ridley Scott still wants to make a third one. So we'll see how that goes. But I thought Prometheus was just fine how it is. As far as the actual first three films go, how do you specifically feel about Aliens and then Alien 3?
For Aliens, or firstly, I would like to see a third film in the Prometheus Covenant arc. But I do think if they do a third film, it will directly tie into Alien. I think they're going to, whether Ridley Scott wants to, I think they would directly tie it in to give it more gravitas and more meaning. As for the quadrilogy, so yeah, the Aliens, Alien 3 and Resurrection, Aliens is as good as, if not on the par, if not better than Alien, but it's different. It's a different kind of film, as we've mentioned. As everyone knows, Aliens is much more kind of it's an action film. It's a sci-fi action film. It's the Marines. It's the big macho Marines. You know, the big guys and the big girls with their big guns. It's got the great moments, the great classic lines of dialogue, but it's a lot more up and at you. It's a lot more in your face. It's bigger in scope, which isn't a bad thing because Aliens is magnificent, but it is almost like a polar opposite of Alien, which worked so well because of its simplicity or its stripped back nature. Whereas Aliens is a lot bigger, and obviously they do have great moments of tension in Aliens. Aliens is a wonderful, wonderful movie, and James Cameron just happens to make bloody good sequels, so let's see about Avatar 2, huh? But Aliens, I think, is very, very good. It goes without saying, I really enjoy Aliens and how Ripley evolves in that film, and people like Newt, obviously there's a character called Hudson, gotta love him. Hicks, a big fan. Alien 3, you know, David Fincher's oddity. Again, a lot of interference with the studio. There's about 10 different drafts of 10 different films. And what Fincher did was basically he had his hands tied behind his back and was told to make an Alien film with a bastardized version of all these scripts. I think he did the best he could with what he got. I think it's interesting that they're on where they are with the prisoners, that kind of like pseudo-religious aspect to it. I've rewatched Alien 3 quite a lot recently, not for any reason, but because it's on Sky Cinema in the United Kingdom, it's just there. So if I'm doing something like pod work or something, I'll just put one of the Alien films on in the background, and Alien 3, because it's the first on the list, I'll just play that. And whilst it's still not great, it's not as bad as I remember, but it's not anywhere near the level of Alien or Aliens. Resurrection, yeah,
yeah, big side.
It's a film. I don't really want to say too much about that. Again, like they say, that weird kind of hybrid thing at the end, and how they brought Ripley back and the cloning. I don't know what to think about that. I'm not a huge fan of that film. But what about you? Aliens, Alien 3, Resurrection. And do you think that there should be a fifth film? Because Sigourney Weaver wants to come back for a fifth film. You know, Neil Blomkamp was going to do it. So what do you think about 2, 3, 4 and the thoughts about a fifth film?
Yeah, so I'll start. We'll get into Neil Blomkamp's version, which I find interesting. But Aliens, complete polar opposite of Alien, but also it stays true to kind of the lore and the atmosphere of the original Alien, in the sense that we go back, we return to LV-426, the moon planet. And it's just, it's such a pivotal portion of the first film that it was kind of brilliant on Cameron's part to return there and to, just flesh out the story there completely. I really like that. And Aliens, completely different film. I put Alien over Aliens any day, but that's just because my love of horror is strong, and Alien is more of a horror film than the sequel is. So, I really appreciate what Aliens did, and I kind of watch them back to back. Honestly, they're both great films, and they're both kind of almost near perfection. So as far as Alien 3 goes, it's a little bit of a tonal shift. And I even respect what Fincher did at the end there, specifically with Ripley's death. I thought it made sense for the movie that he constructed and the script that he had. But while there might have been a slight tonal shift in Alien 3, Alien Resurrection is a complete pivot, and I can't get behind it. If I want a movie where I don't have to think about it, and I want to see, I guess, a kind of weird, strange performance from Sigourney Weaver, I guess that's the movie I'm going to.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't find really hardly any redeeming qualities from Resurrection. I appreciate the ambition, but that's about all I can say for that. As far as Alien 5 goes, I don't know if you got a chance to check out any of the concept art that Blomkamp had done for that film. It looked exciting to me. At the very least, it looked like we were returning to LV-426. We were bringing back Hicks and Newt from Aliens, and we were going to have the sequel that we should have gotten probably from Aliens, at least to a certain extent. And I was really fascinated by that concept art. I recommend anyone who's listening to this who wants to see Alien 5 to go check out some of that original concept art. But of course, Ridley Scott had to step in and take control. And then we got Alien Covenant and Prometheus. So I'm not sure if that's what we wanted, but it's what we got.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of saying it. If you ask me what I would rather have, I don't know, I'm torn, because the idea of going back as like the prequel is interesting, but at the same time, do we really need to know where an alien came from? I mean, it's a big, wide galaxy out there. Space, it's infinite. They could have just come from anywhere. They could just be another life form out there. We don't need to see that they were born from engineers and all this kind of stuff. I would have rather have seen Alien 5, which was going to ignore... I think it's going to ignore Alien 3 and Resurrection, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and the concept art it's scary. The concept art was creepy, and I really, really love it. And like you say, we're going to get more of Hicks, who would have been a bit older, and we would have had more of Newt, who would have been, again, a little bit older, and we would have had a proper send-off for Ripley. And I think they were going to push Newt as like the new lead. So how that would have gone. So kind of like the new Ripley as well. But some of the concept art is bonkers, and I kind of want to see that film now. But it's funny because in the middle of December, Sigourney Weaver and Neil Blomkamp were saying, we're still pushing for this. A couple of days later, well, it's now on hold. And at the beginning of 2020, it's not happening, Ridley Scott said. So, I mean, but that's the kind of vibes we've been getting for the last few years, that it's not happening. Or it might be. Sigourney Weaver wants it to happen, not happening. Well, we might get it. I mean, the last few films may have stopped. I mean, the performance of Prometheus and Covenant may have put paid to the idea of a fifth film. It may have even put paid to the chances of Ridley Scott getting to do his third installment in this particular Alien trilogy. But I would really like to see an Alien 5. I don't think they're finished yet. I don't think we're finished with this story. I think there is more you can do with this than stuck on a spacecraft in space. Don't bring it to Earth, for God's sake. Don't give me any of that. But I think there's more story here.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And we've seen this done in other horror franchises recently, with Terminator Dark Fate, and we've also seen it with the reboot of Halloween, where, those movies, maybe not so much Terminator Dark Fate, but specifically with Halloween, we saw what would happen if your lead star, Jamie Lee Curtis, is so enthusiastic about returning and just kind of forgetting the sequels and moving the story forward from the first one. And we saw how that worked box office wise. Now, I'm not saying that, obviously they were working with kind of a smaller budget than an Alien sequel probably would, but the same concept applies. Your lead star is so enthusiastic about continuing that story. And I think if it were any other director, Sigourney Weaver might have more pull with the studio than she does. But because it's Ridley Scott and because it's his franchise, essentially, it's a little bit hard to get it off the ground. As much as I would like to see it, I don't think at this point we're going to. But it seems like, and especially with we're forgetting about the 20th Century and Disney merger.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen with that franchise moving forward.
Yeah, we may not see anything from them, especially with the Mouse House behind it now. But I mean, again, I'm never going to say never, but at the minute it's looking quite unlikely, which is a shame. But it would be remiss before we move on anywhere else to not mention Alien vs Predator or Requiem. So just quickly then, what did you think about those films?
Requiem, not good. I don't really have much to comment on it, specifically because I've only seen it twice, so there's not much there for me. I like the concept, small town, rural setting. That's kind of interesting. But as far as Aliens versus Predator goes, that movie has a little bit of a soft spot for me because I remember right around the time that movie came out, we had a bunch of games that I was playing, Aliens versus Predator, on my console. And I remember how fun those games were, especially, you could play as a Marine, a colonial Marine, or you could play as the Predator or the alien. And I really grew to love that whole kind of, cosmic subplot that they had going, that universe crossover. And so that movie to me actually was decent. And you have Lance Henriksen, who's in Aliens, and he's in Terminator, and he's kind of just in all of these franchises that somehow combine, especially with Dark Horse Comics. And so it's kind of threading the plot a little bit, but he's playing the infamous, Weyland-Yutani, or the head of the corporation anyway. But he, I think he was my favorite part of that movie, and everything else in that movie is kind of not great, but I do like the kind of the pyramid structure that they had for that film. The setting, it kind of was reminiscent of the original Alien in the sense of, you're claustrophobic, you're confined to these small spaces with these people that you don't necessarily like. So it kind of brought back that flavor from the original Alien. But as far as everything else in the movie, it was cool to see the Predator and Alien fight, but outside of that, I don't think that there was really that much there either.
Yeah, they didn't really fight for that long either, and you didn't really get to see much. But yeah, I like the setting and like the use of the old civilizations and how they tied that in. And I know that Prometheus did that as well. But AVP Requiem was just an excuse to show some quite nasty images with some bad editing and some very dark, shadowy scenes, which you couldn't see what was going on anyway. So yeah, those films are kind of like guilty popcorn films, which you can watch and just be like, yeah, this is great, and then afterwards feel a bit dirty for having to sit through it. But I thought I'd ask you about those. And future little fact I just found before I move on is the word Padme appears on the self-destruct panel in Alien. It's the first time it appeared in sci-fi before The Phantom Menace. The word
That's
Padme.
interesting.
Great. Apparently Alien shares a cinematic universe with Blade Runner, which makes it even cooler now. And for the Brits out there, apparently David Jason, Del Boy himself, was going to play Brett, but his scheduling conflicts with Only Fools and Horses forbid that. And Harrison Ford was offered the role of Dallas, so we could have had a very, very different film out there. But just before we came on, I put out an impromptu poll out on social media, just asking you guys, what did you think of Alien, and did you prefer the sequels at all? As of now, we've had 112 odd votes. 94.6% of people love Alien. 5.4% not a fan of it. Some of the comments. Ant shot first. Northern Hunk. He said the original is best, but Aliens might be his favourite. Ant Goodman. He loves Alien. When he was younger, Aliens was his favourite, but now Alien's number one. Jonathan Birkenfield, the Statesman. Alien is number one, but I love Aliens, and I love all of them apart from Resurrection. Hannah Kathleen, as a horror fan, Alien is the best and most suspenseful. Paul Buckle, Alien Special Edition was a favourite of mine. Behind the Screams podcast, friend of the show, he said Alien is a far better horror movie, but Aliens is one of the finest action movies of all time. It's tough to choose. What else? We've got the Film Fella and Friends. Alien is one of my favourite movies and franchises. Alien is an incredible horror thriller. Aliens is one of the best action movies of all time. Andy from Canada, loved Alien, liked Aliens even more. Jeremy Camp, Aliens is my favourite in the series, but I also like Prometheus, and Covenant was fine. Paul just said, I prefer Aliens only, so he doesn't care about any of the other sequels. Sergeant Joker, I enjoy all the movies, including Prometheus and Covenant. They've all got their merits, even the bad ones. It's still an excuse to see the xenomorph. And finally, we had Matthew David Bell said, what a movie. The formal review, amazing film, completely stands up today. Snicked87, the King of Wales, just said, oh yes. And the best comment of them all comes from Kelly Hoston. She said of Alien, it's so scary, but I'm glad the cat survived. There you go.
That's important. Close call there with Ripley throwing that cat around like a rag doll there, but yeah.
I've just got images of you just getting more and more angry at the thought of Ripley just throwing the cat around. Just rather than sod the xenomorph, save the cat.
That's true. I guess she did get the cat in the escape ship, so there's that.
Yeah, and she did put him into the hypersleep type as well. So, okay, before we wrap up, then put you on the spot now. Alien, 1979, a classic of many genres. If you had to pinpoint one moment which stands out for you, like the one favourite moment of the film or best, what is it? What's it going to be?
Has to be Mother's Directive, the crew expendable. That moment right there, it's so effective, and it's probably the most prominent thing that I remember when I think about, actually watching Alien for the first time. Just that sinking of your heart when you see that directive pop up on screen, that none of this mattered, none of the people on the ship mattered. We're trying to make money.
That's a very good shout. I might just have to be a basic Billy and go for the chestburster scene just because of the impact. But again, a lot of that is based on the 20 or 25 minutes of setting of exposition before, visual exposition as well. Everything that's going on, not knowing what's happened, and then you get you get thrown off balance when Kane's okay. Hey, Kane's fine. The facehugger is dead. Kane's fine. And then you get the big reveal. So it's kind of like that 1-2 punch. I think it's one of the most iconic scenes in film history. Mm. That aside, possibly the line that Ian Holmes says, where says, I can't lie about your chances, but you have my sympathy. I think it's a great line. I think it's well presented. And after the crew expendable message, that just hammers home that these guys are well and truly screwed. So other than that, those two are mine. But that's a very, very good choice for yours. So I think that's it. That wraps up our conversation about Alien. Jared, thank you very much, firstly, for coming on, and secondly, thank you very much for liking this film.
Oh yeah, no problem. No one had to hold me hostage to get me like this film. It's something that I've enjoyed since I was in middle school. Like I said, it started my whole sci-fi interest. So a rewatch is always welcomed in my home.
Well, I'm going to go and rewatch Prometheus. If not tonight, then certainly over the weekend. And I'll feed back to everybody in the world to what I thought about Prometheus. But Jared, my friend, if the world wants to find out more about you and your fantastic writing, they don't, then they bloody well should do. Where online can the world find you?
Yeah, so you can find me online. Specifically, you can find the Burrow Reviews online. Twitter is @BurrowReviews. Facebook and Instagram, it's @TheBurrowReviews. And then we also have a Patreon campaign going right now. If you wanted to check that out, you can go to patreon.com/TheBurrowReviews to find out more there.
And what about the podcasts?
Oh, yes. I also do have a podcast. It's called the Into the Burrow podcast. And I use that basically to just talk about some film news. I may cover a couple of reviews, specifically what's streaming right now. Especially during these Corona times, it's what seems to be easiest for me to kind of control. Can't wait to get back to the theater, though. And once I do, I'm sure I'll start adding those reviews on there as well. And you can find that on all major providers.
Guys, go check out Jared's work. He puts an awful lot of work into the Burrow Reviews, and it pays off. And he's a very knowledgeable film buff as well, so do go check it out. And I echo the final part of what Jared has said. In terms of where you can find me, it's whatiwatchtonight.co.uk, What I Watch Tonight, Twitter and Instagram as well. Find us on Rotten Tomatoes and find all the shows on any podcast provider of choice. And as Jared said, yes, once the theatres start opening, I may actually start posting reviews of actual new films. I haven't done any recently because there's none coming out. So I've taken a break. And as we mentioned at the beginning, just to watch old classics like Alien and just find that love for film again. So when the films start dropping, we will both start dropping reviews. So guys, yeah, if you like what you've heard, please do tell your friends that there's a show out there. In this case, where we're talking about Alien or just classic films or great films in general. If you do like what you hear, please do consider leaving us a good review on your podcast provider of choice. But again, finally, Jared, thank you once again. Listeners, thank you for listening. And until next time from me, see ya.